In April of 1887, 11 years before the county surveyor ever drew a straight line through that part of the territory, a woman named Cora Vance began a habit she would keep for the next 31 years without missing a season. Recording in a canvas-bound ledger she bought for 30 cents at a Socorro dry goods store exactly how many hours of water ran through her headgate on Alamosa Creek, and on which days and whose turn it was. She never called it anything grander than the water book. She never told the ranchers upstream she was keeping it. She just kept it, entry after entry, the way a woman keeps a promise nobody asked her to make. Naomi Coulter was 58 years old when she buried her husband on a Tuesday in October and lost his mother's house by Wednesday morning. The funeral home smelled of carnations and cold coffee, a smell she would carry in her clothes for a week. The folding chair beneath her had a broken slat that pressed into her spine every time she shifted. Somewhere behind her, her sister-in-law Sherilyn Coulter's boot heels clicked against the linoleum in a rhythm too brisk for grief. Naomi did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the closed casket and on her own hands, which held $4,112 in a checking account that would need to last her the rest of her life. Daniel had been sick for 14 months. Pancreatic cancer does not negotiate, and by the end, there had been nothing left to sell that they had not already sold. His truck, his tools, the second mortgage his mother, Lorraine Coulter, had co-signed and never let anyone forget. Lorraine sat in the front row in a good wool coat in October heat, her son Wes beside her with his hand resting proprietarily on the back of her chair, as if the funeral itself belonged to him. Wes Coulter had a way of standing that made rooms feel smaller. He ran the family's insurance agency out of a glass building in Alamogordo and had financed a new Jubilee truck the week his father died, the payment on it larger than Naomi's monthly grocery bill 3 times over. He did not cry at his brother's funeral. He checked his phone twice during the eulogy. By 6 the next morning, a moving truck was parked in the driveway of the house Naomi and Daniel had lived in for 11 years. A house that had, in fact, always belonged to Lorraine, who had never signed it over the way she'd promised. Naomi stood on the porch in her robe, holding a coffee she hadn't finished making, and watched 2 men she'd never met carry her husband's recliner down the steps. The house was always Mama's. Wes said, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. You knew that she had known it. She had simply believed, foolishly, that 11 years of marriage bought more loyalty than a deed. She had nowhere to go, $41 in cash in her purse, and a phone that rang at 9 that morning with a Socorro area code, and a voice asking whether she was prepared to attend the reading of her late father-in-law's estate the following week, an estate, she had been told, more than once contained nothing that concerned her. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something, she would later call it nothing more than habit, made her answer. The law office of Prescott and Hale occupied the 2nd floor of a limestone building in Socorro that had stood since before the highway existed, and the reading itself was held in a conference room with a table long enough to seat 14. Naomi counted 7 Coulters present, none of whom had spoken more than a sentence to her in the 2 years since Daniel's diagnosis. Wes arrived in a new sport coat, still creased from the store, checking the truck's financing app on his phone under the table while the attorney read. Sherilyn wore a fringed suede jacket she'd had custom-tooled for a rodeo fundraiser 8 months earlier, and had worn to every semi-formal occasion since, and she did not look at Naomi once. The will divided $186,400 in liquid assets among Lorraine's 3 living children. Wes's share alone came to $61,000. There was a lake house near Elephant Butte, left outright to Sherilyn. There was a set of oil leases near Roswell, left to Lorraine's youngest daughter, Denise, and then, near the bottom of the 2nd page, The attorney read a line that made half the room shift in their seats. A parcel of 1,140 acres in Catron County, known locally as the Vance Place, along with all structures, water, and mineral interests appurtenant thereto, bequeathed to Naomi Coulter, widow of Daniel Coulter, in recognition of a promise made to her husband in 2019. Weeze laughed, not cruelly, he would have said, just honestly. That old dust bowl? Daddy tried to sell that place for 11 years and couldn't get a rancher to take it for free. There's no well that runs past July. You can have it, Naomi. God knows nobody else wants it. The room laughed with him, softly, the way people laugh when they've already decided a thing is settled. Naomi said nothing. She had learned, over 11 years of Coulter Thanksgivings, that silence cost her less than defending herself ever did. After the reading, the attorney's paralegal handed her a cardboard box, unlocked, unremarkable, the kind any office keeps a dozen of, in a supply closet. Inside sat the ranch's deed, a stack of old tax notices, and a canvas-bound ledger, its cover water-stained and soft at the corners, its pages filled front to back in 3 different hands across what looked like decades. Nobody at the table had glanced at it twice. It looked, Naomi thought, exactly like what it was pretending to be, a dead man's farm records, worth nothing to anyone settling an estate. Sherilyn's laugh had carried down the hallway as they'd left, delighted, already discussing where to have the lake house's dock replaced. Naomi sat that night in the motel room she was paying $59 to occupy, opened the ledger to its first page, and read a name she didn't recognize written in a careful, slanted hand. Cora Vance, her book, begun this 9th day of April, 1887. She turned pages for an hour before she understood she was looking at water. Hours of it, turns of it, decade after decade, entered in a rhythm too steady to be anything but deliberate. Near the back, in a hand she now recognized as the same one from the first page, a line had been underlined twice, filed first. Let them say otherwise. She did not know yet what that meant, but Daniel had told her in his last clear week that his grandmother used to say the ranch kept its own accounting and gave it out only to people patient enough to read the whole book. She had thought it was a dying man's comfort at the time. She packed her one bag and decided, before she'd finished thinking it through, to drive to Catron County in the morning. The drive from Socorro to the Vance Place ran 93 miles west on US 60, and then 31 miles south that the map still labeled. Optimistically, as maintained. Naomi filled her tank with her last $30 in cash and did not eat lunch, telling herself it was because she wasn't hungry, which was not true. The land changed somewhere past Magdalena, the pinon and juniper thinning into open grassland, the color of a lion's coat, the mountains folding back to let the sky get enormous. She passed a historical marker for the old livestock driveway, weathered nearly unreadable, and did not stop to read it. She smelled the ranch before she saw the house, creosote after a rain that hadn't happened in weeks, and under it, faintly, running water, a smell that made no sense in a place everyone had told her was dry. The temperature dropped as the road dipped into a shallow draw, 10 degrees at least, cool enough to raise gooseflesh on her arms. She heard the creak before anything else, a low, continuous sound she hadn't expected in October, in a county that had been posted for drought since June. Only then did she see the house. It was worse than Wes's dismissiveness had prepared her for. The east wing had partially collapsed, sometime in the last 2 decades, its roofline sagging like a shoulder giving out. 14 rooms, according to the old assessor's card, tucked into the ledger, and at least 4 of them open to the sky. The barn had lost half its shingles. A rusted truck without wheels sat sunk to its axles in weeds behind what had once been a chicken coop. She sat in her car for 11 full minutes before she made herself get out. She almost turned around twice, once at the sight of a rattlesnake sunning itself on the porch step, which she waited out with more patience than she believed she had left in her. And once when the front door, unlocked and hanging from a single hinge, swung open onto a smell of mouse droppings and old paper that made her eyes sting. It would have been reasonable to leave. Nobody would have blamed her. She stayed anyway, because leaving meant going back to a motel room she couldn't afford past Thursday, and because some small, stubborn part of her wanted to see, at least once, the place her husband's family had thrown away without a second thought. The county's own drought maps, she'd later learn, listed Alamosa Creek as intermittent past July for as long as anyone had bothered surveying it. But standing at the fence line that afternoon, she could hear it running steadily, unmistakably, the way water runs when something upstream is actually feeding it rather than starving it. Every neighboring rancher she would eventually meet believed, without exception, that this stretch of the Vance place dried up every summer like the rest of the county. Naomi stood there a long while, listening to a creek that supposedly wasn't running, and understood, even before she knew why, that somebody's certainty about this land had been wrong for a very long time. She followed the sound the next morning, ledger in hand, working her way upstream along a bank thick with rabbit brush and old barbed wire gone slack with rust. The book's earliest entries mentioned a stone gate above the second bend, and Naomi walked the better part of a mile before she found anything that matched. A low hand-fitted wall of creek rock half buried in silt, spanning a narrow channel where the water had clearly been directed. Once, on purpose, it took her most of the day to clear it by hand. The silt had set nearly to clay after decades of settling, and she worked with a garden trowel and her bare fingers until her nails split, and her forearms burned in a way she hadn't felt since she used to help Daniel split firewood. By late afternoon, she'd uncovered enough of the structure to see that it wasn't a natural rockfall at all. It was built, coursed, and fitted the way a person builds something meant to outlast them, with a narrow iron sluice set into its center, corroded nearly solid but still faintly adjustable, carved into the flattest stone at the gate's crown, weathered but legible if she traced it with a fingertip, were 4 characters, CV 87. She sat back on the bank and opened the ledger again. This time to the entries she'd skimmed past the night before without understanding them, decades of water-turn records, meticulous to the hour, naming this exact stretch of creek, naming neighbors upstream by name, recording disputes over turns going back to a drought in 1902 that the ledger described in 4 flat, furious sentences Cora Vance had never bothered softening for anyone who might read them later. Near the final third of the book, in ink gone the color of weak tea, one entry ran longer than the rest, dated the summer of 1918. They came again asking to buy the right off me for $11, certain I'd sell rather than argue with men. I filed first, before any of them, and I have 30 years of this book to prove it, if anyone ever bothers to ask. I am not keeping this water for myself. I am keeping it so that whoever comes after me in this family has one thing nobody can talk her out of believing she's owed. Naomi sat on the bank with the ledger open on her knees and did not move for a long time. She did not cry exactly. She sat very still, the way a person sits when a fact has finally arrived that rearranges everything that came before it. She was still sitting there, the ledger open across her knees, when she heard a truck engine on the gravel road above, and a door slam that she recognized, with a small cold drop in her stomach, as Wes Coulter's. She had not told anyone she was driving out here. Wes's explanation when she climbed back up to the yard was almost bored in its delivery. A neighbor of Lorraine's, it turned out, had a cousin who did title work in Catron County and had mentioned, in passing, that the Vance parcel showed a change of ownership. Wes had simply followed the paper trail, the way he followed every paper trail that touched a dollar amount, however small. "You didn't need to drive all the way out here to see it's a wreck," he said, looking past her at the collapsed east wing. "Not at the creek behind her, not yet. I actually came to save you some trouble." He explained it the way he explained insurance premiums to nervous clients. Calm, reasonable, already 3 steps ahead. The county, he said, had put the ranch up for 3 years of delinquent property taxes, $1,100 and change, a debt nobody in the family had bothered paying because nobody believed the land was worth the $1,100 it would cost to redeem it. He had purchased the tax lien certificate that morning, before driving out for exactly that amount. New Mexico law gave her 3 years to redeem it. After that, the certificate holder could petition for the deed outright. Might. "I'm not taking anything from you," he said, and he seemed to believe it. "I'm just making sure somebody's paying attention to this place, since apparently you weren't going to." Naomi said nothing about the stone gate downstream, or the ledger folded now inside her jacket. She had learned, a long time ago, is never the moment someone is trying to take it from you. "Generous of you." "That's generous of you, Wes," she said, and meant every word of it as a private joke only she could hear. He left with the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he has already won something, reminding her, almost gently, that the clock on the lien had already started and that most families in her position simply let land like this go rather than throw good money after bad. Naomi stood in the yard until his taillights disappeared over the rise, and only then did she allow herself to walk back down to the creek, sit beside the gate she'd spent the day uncovering, and understand exactly what she was going to do with the 3 years Wes Coulter had just, without meaning to, handed her. She did not wait 3 years. She spent her first 4 days making phone calls from the porch, the only spot on the property where her phone held a signal, and found on the second call a woman named Adele Marsh, 93 years old, living 11 miles east, whose own grandmother had ranched the parcel directly upstream from the Vance place for most of a century. Idell remembered the name Cora Vance, the way she remembered most things from before her hearing started to go, precisely, and without needing to be asked twice. Her water always ran, Idell said, rocking on a porch that smelled of coffee and cedar smoke. Everybody upstream knew it and nobody upstream liked it. My own grandmother used to say the Vance woman had first turned on that creek and knew exactly why, though she never once explained herself to a soul who asked. Idell signed a sworn statement to that effect in front of a notary in reserve 2 days later, continuous personal knowledge of the Vance family's water use, unbroken across nearly 70 years of her own memory. Naomi paired it with photographs of the stone headgate, still carrying its carved initials and date, and with the ledger itself, 31 years of entries in Cora Vance's own hand naming this exact stretch of creek before any other filing on record. A hydrologist with the office of the state engineer, a careful woman named Priscilla Ortega, spent 6 days confirming what the ledger, the stonework, and Idell Marsh's memory all agreed on independently, that the right predated every other claim on that stretch of Alamosa Creek by at least 11 years, and that in a basin where 3 ranching operations upstream had spent decades assuming their own, later rights were senior, a confirmed priority of that size was worth, by the state's own appraisal, no less than $740,000 to any of them. The offer came from the largest of the 3, the Broken Spur Cattle Company. Within a week of the confirmation being recorded, $600,000 for a permanent lease of 40 of Cora's 42 miners inches, with the ranch itself, its structures, and the remaining water staying entirely in Naomi's name. She used $1,140 of it, less than a day's interest on the rest, to redeem Wes's tax lien in full, in person, at the Catron County Treasurer's office on a Thursday morning, with the receipt photographed and emailed to the whole family before lunch. Wheeze called her that afternoon, and she let it go to voicemail twice before she answered, the way she had let his mother's call go, once, a lifetime and days ago. "There's some kind of mistake," he said, and she could hear, under the practiced calm, the particular panic of a man watching a number rearrange itself in front of him. "The county's telling me the parcel's assessed value just. That can't be right." "It's right," she said. "That land's worthless. Naomi. Everybody knows that land's worthless." She thought of him at the will reading, telling a room full of relatives that she could have the Dust Bowl because nobody else wanted it. She thought of Cora Vance kneeling at that headgate in 1887. "You told me I could have it because nobody wanted it." "You told because nobody wanted it," Naomi said evenly, without triumph in her voice, because triumph wasn't what this was. "You were right about the nobody wanted it part. You just never once opened the book to ask why." He did not have an answer to that, which she understood. Standing in the ranch yard with the creek running steadily behind her was itself the answer. The lien he'd bought to control her for 3 years had cost him $1,100 and returned him nothing. The redemption had been recorded before the county clerk's office closed for the day, witnessed by 2 employees and a title agent who would, within the month, mention the story to at least 4 other people in a town small enough that everyone would eventually hear some version of it. Lorraine called that evening, careful and quiet, asking whether the family might still be included in whatever Naomi decided to do with the ranch. Naomi told her she'd think about it, and meant for the first time in 11 years exactly what she said and nothing more. She drove back out to the ranch alone that night, parked the same car in the same yard, and walked past the collapsed east wing without looking at it, down to the creek, into air that had finally cooled enough to smell like rain that was, this time, actually coming. Wes Coulter sold the Jubilee 9 months later, quietly, to cover a shortfall in the insurance agency that had nothing to do with Naomi, and everything to do with decisions he'd been making the same way for years. Fast, visible, and never once asking what he couldn't see. Sherilyn kept the lake house. Nobody in the family brought up the ranch at Thanksgiving again, though Naomi noticed that first November that her chair no longer had a broken slat, because she wasn't sitting in that house at all. She rebuilt the east wing first, 4 rooms instead of 14, and paid a Magdalena contractor named Ruben Salcido in full and on time, which he told her plainly was more than most of his clients managed. She kept 40 of Cora's 42 miner's inches leased to the Broken Spur outfit, and used the remaining 2, along with a herd of 60 head she bought outright that spring, to start exactly the kind of small, stubborn operation her husband's grandmother had once run out of that same land. She named it, on the new sign at the end of the gravel road, the Cora Vance Ranch. Idell Marsh came out for the sign raising, sitting in a folding chair Naomi set up specially at the edge of the yard, and told anyone who'd listened that she'd waited 70 years to see somebody finally take that water seriously again. The moral of it, if there was one, was not that the land had been valuable all along, though it had been. It was that a woman who has been told, more than once, that she is worth nothing, has often simply not yet been asked the right question by someone patient enough to read the whole book. On the first anniversary of Daniel's death, Naomi walked down to the stone headgate with a granddaughter of her own coming that spring. Daniel's brother's youngest, who had asked whether Naomi might teach her someday how the ranch worked. Naomi said she would be glad to. She did not say that the first lesson would be the same one Cora Vance had kept in careful ink for 31 years. That the value of a thing is rarely what the person standing next to you believes it to be, and that patience, more often than anger, is what a woman keeps in her hands when everyone else has already left the room.